The rain came down in soft, whispering sheets as Sierra stood beneath the crooked roof of the old train station, her coat soaked through at the shoulders. Her hands gripped the bouquet so tightly that the petals of the white lilies trembled with every gust of wind. She was waiting, again, like she had always waited. For him, Jason, 3 years ago, he'd promised her everything. A new life, a better one away from the shadows of their small town and its rotting secrets. He said he'd take her with him to the city, where dreams were more than just pretty lies sewn into bedtime stories. He told her they'd get married in a little chapel by the sea, that she wouldn't have to keep living in borrowed rooms and broken trust, and she had believed him. Sierra looked down at her phone for the 10th time. No calls, no messages, just the last one from him a week ago. Soon. It had always been soon with Jason. Someday. Later. Just wait. She waited through birthdays he forgot, through hospital visits when her mother died and he didn't come, through nights when loneliness became a second skin. And still, she waited because loving Jason had become the only thing she knew how to do. A train passed in the distance, the rumble rising and falling like a warning. She closed her eyes. Maybe this time she wouldn't cry. Maybe she was done with that. Behind her, the world moved on. People rushed to places they belonged, arms looped around lovers, hands clutched tight to the warmth of certainty. But not Sierra. She was always left behind, a bride without a wedding, a woman with a heart constantly on hold. She didn't notice Kenneth at first. He'd been leaning on the far end of the platform, watching her with careful eyes. Not intrusive, just observant. He wore a dark green coat and carried a book tucked beneath his arm like it meant something to him. His hair was longer than she remembered, streaked now with silver at the temples. He had always been the quiet one back in school, the boy with hands inked in sketches and stories. He once told her she looked like the kind of girl poems were written about. She hadn't known what to say then, and she didn't know now. You still waiting for him? Kenneth's voice was low but clear, like he didn't need to raise it to be heard. Sierra's throat tightened. I guess. He stepped closer, eyes soft but sharp. He's not coming. She bit the inside of her cheek, hard enough to taste blood. You don't know that. I do, he said, setting the book down beside her. Because no man who sees a woman like you waiting this long deserves her, and no man who loves you makes you wait this way. She didn't reply. She couldn't. The truth was too raw, too close. It curled in her stomach like something spoiled. Kenneth paused, then added, You look tired, Sierra. Tired of being patient. She was. God, she was. And that terrified her. Because who was she, if not the woman who waited for Jason? I'm fine, she said softly. No, you're not. But you could be. The train groaned to a halt a few tracks away. A couple laughed as they climbed aboard, the sound cutting through her like wind. She watched them disappear, holding hands, leaving without looking back. That night, Sierra walked home alone. Her apartment smelled like jasmine and disappointment. The framed picture of her and Jason still sat crooked on the shelf. She turned it face down, then picked it up, then threw it against the wall. The glass shattered. The silence afterward was almost peaceful. She stood in the dark, chest heaving. Then slowly, almost cautiously, she walked to her dresser and pulled out the envelope she hadn't dared open in weeks. The one from the university she'd applied to a lifetime ago. The one Jason had told her to put on hold until we're settled. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. Congratulations. She read the word 3 times before it made sense. Somewhere deep in her chest, a dam cracked. Not from grief, not even from rage, but from the unfamiliar feeling of something new. Possibility. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were swollen, makeup smudged. She looked nothing like a bride, but maybe that was the point. Maybe she didn't need to be anyone's bride anymore. Not unless she chose it, and she would choose it. On her terms, in her time. Sierra picked up her phone and typed a message. To Jason, don't come. I won't be waiting anymore. Then she deleted his number, and just like that, something inside her began to shift. 2 weeks had passed since Sierra had shattered the picture frame, and in those 14 days, something strange and quiet had taken root in her. It wasn't happiness exactly, or even peace, but it was movement, a sense of her soul unfreezing. After years stuck in the same place, beneath the weight of someone else's promises, she'd started packing. Not much, just the essentials. A suitcase of clothes, her laptop, the one book her mother had marked up with notes in the margins. Everything else she left behind. She didn't want to take ghosts with her. The acceptance letter sat on the counter, now uncreased, no longer hidden. Every morning she read it again, as if to remind herself that it hadn't vanished overnight, that she really had been chosen for something, not begged to stay, chosen to go. It felt foreign. Kenneth had started showing up, not in a deliberate way, but in that quiet, dependable rhythm that felt like stability. A coffee at the corner cafe she used to avoid, a walk home where he didn't press her for answers. He never mentioned Jason again, but she knew he hadn't forgotten. She could see it in the way he looked at her, like he was holding back, like he knew there was more beneath her surface but wasn't going to dig for it. I always thought you'd leave first, he said one afternoon, sitting across from her at a bench downtown. Back in school, you were the only one who didn't seem made for this place. Sierra sipped her tea, then stared out at the pale gray sky. I thought so too, but then I met him. Jason, he said, not a question. Yeah. There was silence for a beat. I was in love with you back then, Kenneth said, his voice casual but not careless. She turned, surprised not by the confession, but by how gently it landed. I think I knew, or maybe I just pretended not to. It didn't matter. You were in love with him. People can smell that kind of thing a mile away. She didn't answer. What could she say? That she'd wasted years on a man who gave her just enough to keep her hoping, but never enough to hold on to. That she'd spent all her 20s in a fog of waiting, dressing up for dinners that never happened, buying dresses for events she was never invited to. Kenneth leaned forward slightly. You know, I used to watch you walk around town with him, smiling like you believed every lie he whispered, and I hated him for that. Her brows furrowed. For lying? No, for being so sure you'd always be there, no matter how many times he left you behind. That stung, because it was true. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her apartment was too quiet, and every creak felt like a memory crawling back. She found herself scrolling through old photos until her thumb froze on one. Her and Dolores. God, Dolores, they hadn't spoken in nearly a year, not since Sierra found out she'd been the one Jason ran to when things with her got complicated. She remembered the betrayal in perfect, brutal detail. How Dolores had looked her in the eye and said, it didn't mean anything. He was just broken. But so was she. The difference was, Sierra had never used her cracks as an excuse to hurt someone else. Still, for reasons she couldn't explain, Sierra opened the message thread and typed, I'm leaving town. Don't know if it matters. Just thought you should know. To her surprise, Dolores replied within minutes, it does. I've never stopped feeling like shit about what happened. I'm sorry, Sierra. Truly. Sierra didn't answer. Maybe she would someday. Maybe not. Not everything needed closure in the shape of words. The next morning, she stood at the edge of town, suitcase in hand, waiting for the bus. Kenneth showed up again because of course he did. It was like he'd learned the rhythm of her days. Without being told. You sure you're ready? He asked. She nodded. I've waited enough for people who don't deserve me. I think I've earned the right to choose something that does. He looked at her with something like wherever you end up, just promise you'll never wait for someone like that again. She smiled, small but real. No more waiting. From now on, I only walk toward things, never backward. The bus pulled up, brakes hissing. She stepped on without looking back, found her seat, and let the town become smaller behind her. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. The university campus was nothing like Sierra expected. It buzzed with life, with people who wore their ambition like armor, walking fast, talking faster. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going. She felt like a ghost at first, quiet, observant, almost out of place, but it didn't scare her. It reminded her of who she used to be. Before Jason, before waiting became a habit. Her apartment was a tiny one-bedroom just off campus. Nothing fancy, bare walls, creaky floorboards, and a window that looked out over a parking lot. But it was hers. No shared space, no borrowed bed, no photos on the walls that threatened to whisper old names. Just clean air, warm light, and silence. She had chosen. She started classes 2 days after moving in. Most of the students were younger than her, fresh-faced and full of certainty. Sierra felt the years between them in every hallway. But she also felt something else, clarity. While they were chasing the idea of what they wanted to be, she already knew what she didn't want. And that was a power of its own. One of her professors, a sharp woman named Dr. Halberd, pulled her aside after a writing workshop. You've Lived, she said, reading through Sierra's latest essay with red-inked fingers. You don't write like someone guessing. You write like someone who's bled through every word. Sierra didn't know how to respond. She didn't see herself as brave or deep, just broken in specific places. Still, the praise stayed with her longer than she expected. It was the first time in years someone saw something in her that had nothing to do with how she looked or who she loved. She went home that night and wrote for hours pages about choices, about silence, about the heaviness of hope. She didn't think of Jason much anymore. And when she did, it felt like watching a movie she used to love until she realized the ending was garbage. She could still remember the way he used to say her name soft, like a promise. But now it felt more like a trap, like a rope disguised as ribbon. What caught her off guard was Kenneth. He didn't reach out. Not after the bus ride. Not after she left. And for a while, that surprised her. She thought maybe he'd text or call or even send one of his strange little drawings in the mail. But he didn't. And she didn't either, until one Friday night, 3 weeks into the semester, she got a letter.no return address. Just her name in bold, careful handwriting. Inside there was a single page, ink sketch, of a woman standing alone in a crowd, her face turned to the sky. No caption, no name, but she knew it was her. Sierra stared at the drawing for a long time. Her heart didn't race, and her breath didn't catch. It was quieter than that, like a part of her she didn't know was still bruised had just been touched. She flipped the page over, 3 words in tiny script. I see you. That night, she walked to the campus late, sat on the dock, and let herself feel the loneliness without fear. It wasn't the suffocating kind she used to feel with Jason. It was different, now gentler. Like the space between breaths. When her phone buzzed, she almost didn't look. Dolores. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm in town. Can we talk? Sierra stared at the screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She thought about all the pain, the betrayal, the long nights with no answers, and then she typed back. 1 coffee. 1 conversation. That's it. She hit send before she could change her mind, because healing wasn't about forgiving everyone. It was about choosing not to let their poison stay in you forever. The next morning, she met Dolores at a quiet cafe. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, nothing to hide behind, just a plain gray sweater and guilt in her eyes. I'm not here to explain it, Dolores said, voice low. I just want you to know I was never happy with him. Not really. Not even when I thought I won. Sierra folded her hands in her lap. You didn't win. He was never the prize. Dolores swallowed hard, then nodded. Yeah, took me too long to see that. Sierra looked out the window. The world kept spinning. Traffic lights turned. Kids ran past. Someone spilled coffee on the sidewalk. I'm not angry anymore, Sierra said. But I don't miss either of you. Dolores blinked fast. Fair. Sierra stood. Take care of yourself, Dolores. And she walked away. No storm. No shouting. Just a door closed finally. She went home, opened her laptop, and started writing again. The winter came early that year. Sierra woke up one morning to find frost lining her window, painting the glass with quiet silver veins. The radiator coughed and sputtered but barely warmed the room. She wrapped herself in layers and sat by her tiny desk with a hot mug between her palms, watching her breath cloud the air. The world felt still, uncertain, but not cruel. Her days had begun to form a rhythm. Classes, writing, part-time work at the campus library. She liked the library job. It was peaceful, tucked between forgotten volumes and quiet readers. Nobody asked questions. Nobody expected smiles. She could vanish into tasks and catalogs, and no one noticed if her eyes looked tired or if she paused too long on a name she recognized in an old yearbook. One afternoon, while shelving books, her fingers landed on a familiar spine, an old collection of essays about emotional resilience. The same one Jason once gave her when she'd confessed she didn't know how to cope with her mother's death. She pulled it out slowly. The note was still there, tucked between pages like a trap waiting to spring. You're stronger than you think, and I'll never leave you, Jason. She read it once, then again, then closed the book and shelved it without a sound. She didn't need reminders of lies dressed as encouragement. By the end of November, she had turned in her first story for publication. Dr. Halbert had personally pushed her to submit it, said it ripped open with truth. Sierra titled it The Bride of Waiting. It wasn't subtle, but it didn't need to be. The story followed a woman who sat at the edge of every room, always looking at the door, always hoping someone would come in and make her feel chosen. Until, one day, she locked the door herself and walked out. She didn't tell anyone it was about her. 2 days later, she received an acceptance email. They loved it, wanted to publish it in the winter issue of the university's literary journal. It would be her first real print. Her name in ink. Sierra stared at the screen, her chest hollow with disbelief. For a long time, she'd measured her worth in someone else's affection. And now, here it was, value, offered without conditions, without begging. She took herself out to dinner that night. Just her. A small booth at a quiet place 2 streets over. She wore a red scarf and ordered wine without worrying if she looked alone. Halfway through her meal, she saw someone standing near the door. Her fork froze midair. Jason. He hadn't changed much. Still dressed like he walked out of a magazine he didn't actually read. Perfect coat, crooked smile, hands shoved into his pockets like the world owed him something. He saw her. Of course he did. And when he started walking toward her, she didn't panic. Her heart didn't stutter. She simply put her fork down, sat up straighter, and waited. Hey, he said, sliding into the booth without asking. You look different. She raised an eyebrow. Older? Wiser? Alive? He laughed a little. Can we talk? I think we are. Jason looked around the restaurant, then back at her. I miss you. Sierra blinked, then tilted her head. You miss having someone wait for you. That's not fair. No, she said. It's not, but neither was what you did. He leaned in like charm could still undo the years. I wasn't ready then. I was scared. I didn't know how to be what you needed. And yet, you let me believe I was the one who had to wait for you to figure it out. He paused. That same Jason pause. Like he was calculating his next move, rehearsing whatever would keep her on the hook a little longer. I'm here now, he said. She almost laughed. So am I. But I'm not yours anymore. His face shifted just slightly. A flicker of disbelief, as if the strings he'd once tied around her heart had been cut and he never saw it coming. You're really done, he said quietly. Sierra smiled, but it wasn't cruel. It wasn't even angry. It was the smile of someone finally awake. I was his bride of waiting. Now I'm mine. Jason didn't argue. Not really. He just stood, nodded like a man who finally understood the weight of what he'd lost, and left. She watched him go, then picked up her fork and finished her dinner. The snow had started to fall when Sierra left the restaurant, soft and steady, like the world was quietly resetting itself. She wrapped the red scarf tighter around her neck and walked the long way home, not because she needed to think she'd done enough of that for a lifetime, but because the night felt clean, like something had been washed away the moment Jason walked out the door. She didn't cry. She didn't even shake. What she felt was stillness, the kind of peace that doesn't come from winning, but from no longer needing to fight. A tea home. Her inbox held something unexpected, a second message from the publisher. They didn't just want to feature her piece, they wanted her to read it aloud at the winter reading series, a public event. Students, professors, strangers. Sierra stared at the screen, unsure how to feel. Writing had always been her escape, her private rebellion, but reading her pain in front of a room full of people, that was something else entirely. She stared at the invitation, then clicked accept. The next day, she bought herself a new coat, not because she needed it, but because it made her feel worthy. It was black wool, double-breasted, sharp at the collar. When she wore it, she felt taller, braver. She started preparing for the reading in the evenings, pacing her small apartment, with her manuscript in hand. At first, her voice trembled, but slowly, it steadied. The words, her own words, began to sound like armor instead of wounds, and then came the letter. This time, it wasn't from Jason. It was from Kenneth, a real letter, handwritten on thick paper. No sketch this time, just words. You looked so calm on that bus, like someone who'd finally remembered who she was. I didn't write before because I knew you needed silence more than support. But now I want to say something I should have said back then. You don't owe anyone your love, not even the ones who chased you with promises. You get to choose, Sierra. You always did. And if you ever want someone who walks beside you instead of in front or behind, I'm still here. Sierra, read the letter 3 times, folded it, unfolded it again. She felt nothing romantic at first, no butterflies or breathless rush, but she felt seen, and that meant more than anything. She wrote back a week later. I needed to disappear to remember who I was. You were right, waiting isn't the same as loving. I don't know where I'm going yet, but I know what I won't accept anymore. When I'm ready to walk with someone, I'll know, and maybe I'll look for you. She didn't mail it right away, just kept it tucked in her journal. The night of the reading arrived faster than she expected. She stood backstage in a borrowed black dress and heels that pinched slightly. The room beyond the curtain buzzed with laughter and rustling paper. Names were being called, applause, introductions, then hers, Sierra Brooks, reading The Bride of Waiting. She stepped onto the stage. The lights blinded her at first. Then she found the mic, and her hands didn't shake, her voice didn't crack. She read about waiting, about standing on cold platforms, about being second, being silenced, being small, then about waking up, about choosing, about reclaiming the right to want something different. When she finished, there was silence, then applause, not the polite, kind, but real, rising, pulsing applause that wrapped around her like warmth. She stepped down with her heart thundering, cheeks flushed. Backstage, Dr. Halberd caught her arm. That wasn't a reading, she said. That was a reckoning. Sierra laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt true. She walked home that night beneath falling snow, her coat collar up, the city lights turning everything gold, and when she got to her door, she found another letter taped to it, one line only. If you're still choosing, I'd like to take a walk with you. No promises, just footsteps. Kenneth held the letter against her chest, closed her eyes, and smiled. Maybe soon, but only when she chose. The city was still under a blanket of snow the next morning, but inside Sierra, something had shifted again, subtle, like ice melting beneath skin. She moved through her apartment slowly, quietly, folding laundry with more care than necessary, reheating yesterday's tea just to have something warm in her hands. The note from Kenneth was still on her table, smoothed out and resting beside the journal where her reply sat folded. She hadn't sent anything back yet. Not because she didn't want to, but because for once, she wasn't rushing. This wasn't about reacting. It was about choosing, fully, without fear. She spent the afternoon at the library, shelving books and slipping back into the rhythm she found oddly comforting. A girl in the reading corner was crying softly behind a thick novel, and Sierra crouched beside her, offered a tissue without asking. The girl just nodded, wiped her face and mouthed, "Thank you." Sierra remembered being that girl once, lost in someone else's words because her own world didn't make sense. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Sometimes quiet was the greatest kindness. Later that evening, she opened her laptop and stared at a blank document for a long time before typing anything. Not a story this time, a letter to herself. You are not what he left behind. You are what you found when he walked away. You are not pieces scattered on a platform. You are the one who boarded the train and rebuilt your soul from silence. And you do not wait anymore. She printed it and pinned it to her wall. Then, without hesitating, she picked up the letter she had written to Kenneth and walked out the door. The post box was 5 blocks away. Snow crunched beneath her boots, and her breath fogged the air like whispers of old fears finally leaving her lungs. She slipped the letter in, let the metal flap fall shut, and stood there for a moment. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't a dramatic declaration. It was human, honest. Later that week, as the snow thawed into patches of slush, her phone buzzed. Kenneth, there's a bookstore cafe that just opened by the park. Soft jazz, terrible coffee, perfect place to walk into awkward silences. Saturday, maybe, no pressure. She stared at the message, then typed back, Sierra, I like terrible coffee. I'll be there. Saturday came with the first sunshine in weeks. She wore the red scarf again, not because it was cold, but because it felt like a part of her rebirth. The cafe was smaller than she expected, warm and cluttered with mismatched chairs and too many bookshelves. A cat slept near the window. Kenneth was already there, reading, still in that green coat, still with that quiet, steady energy. When he looked up and saw her, he didn't stand. He just smiled, not that smirking, magnetic grin Jason had used like a lure, but a real one, gentle, present. She sat across from him. Terrible coffee? She asked, smirking. Worse than I remembered, he replied. They didn't jump into deep talks. There were no intense questions, no emotional confessions, just easy conversation, books, classes, small childhood memories. They talked about the worst movies they'd ever seen, and how each of them hated a classic they were supposed to love, and somewhere between mocking plot holes and arguing over jazz musicians, she realized something. She wasn't waiting anymore, not even for love. She was living. When the conversation lulled and silence fell between them, Kenneth didn't rush to fill it. He just watched her, his hands wrapped around his chipped mug. "I never wanted to save you," he said. "I just wanted to be near enough when you saved yourself." Sierra met his gaze. "You were. And that was enough." They left the cafe together, but not holding hands. There was no need to. Not yet. Maybe never. Maybe someday. The power wasn't in what might come but in the fact that she could choose it, if she wanted to. She didn't belong to anyone now. She belonged to herself, and she was finally okay with that. Spring arrived like it had been holding its breath all winter, bursting open the trees with blossoms and draping every sidewalk in a warm, golden hue. Sierra walked slower these days, not because she was tired, but because she wanted to see everything. For so long, she had moved through the world like she was late for something she couldn't name. Now, she realized she was exactly where she needed to be. Her second story had just been accepted for publication. This one wasn't about heartbreak. It wasn't even about love. It was about a girl who learned to listen to silence and what it told her when no one else spoke. The editor called it haunting and strangely hopeful. Sierra liked that. She was done writing tragedy for the sake of it. If her pain had to live on the page, it had to bring something back with it. A little light, a little truth. Kenneth had become a regular fixture in her life, not loud or insistent, just there. Sometimes they shared coffee, sometimes walks. Sometimes he left her poems folded into the pages of library books she was shelving. They weren't love notes, not yet. They were more like echoes, pieces of someone who saw her not as broken, but becoming. One night, they ended up on her balcony with takeout and music humming low from her phone. The stars were barely visible above the city lights, but they looked anyway. "I used to think love was supposed to be big," she said. "Loud, dramatic, messy." Kenneth didn't look away from the sky. "And now I think maybe love is just someone not leaving when the silence stretches too long." He nodded. "I can stay quiet." She smiled. "I know." But she wasn't ready to let anyone all the way in. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. And what surprised her most was that Kenneth didn't push. He didn't ask for timelines or labels. He just showed up. With books, with bad jokes, with space, and slowly, Sierra let herself imagine a future not based on someone else's promises, but her own. One morning, she visited her old town. Just for a day. Just to see if the ghosts were still loud. She didn't tell anyone she was coming. She walked past the old train station, now boarded up and half forgotten. The bench where she once sat for hours waiting for Jason was cracked, the paint peeling. It looked smaller now. She stopped in front of the house she used to live in. The curtains were different. The porch had been redone. Life had moved on without her. That should have hurt. It didn't. Then on impulse, she walked into the local cafe, the same one where Jason used to meet her and say, "Just 5 more minutes, babe." The girl behind the counter didn't recognize her. Why would she? Sierra ordered a tea and sat by the window, watching a couple argue gently over which sandwich to split. She used to think that kind of love was boring. She now knew it was sacred. Her phone buzzed. "Kenneth, how's the ghost town?" She grinned and typed back, "Quieter than I remembered. Not scary anymore." "Kenneth, then maybe it's time you forgave the girl who used to live there." Sierra blinked. He was right. When she boarded the bus to leave, she felt lighter. Not because she'd erased her past, but because she'd finally stopped carrying it like a punishment. Back in the city, she opened her laptop that night and started a new story. This one began with a woman who wasn't waiting anymore but walking, running, dancing, choosing badly sometimes, messily, but still choosing. She titled it The Bride of Choice, and for the first time in a long time, Sierra let herself cry, not from grief, but gratitude, because this life, this breath, this self, it was hers again. The summer came in slow, soft waves like the city itself was exhaling. Trees hung heavy with green, the air smelled like rain and pavement, and Sierra began to live as if she'd always known how. Mornings with tea and her feet on the windowsill. Afternoons writing in the library's quietest corner. Evenings with music drifting through open windows and the hum of a world that, finally, didn't ask her to be anyone else. Her story, the bride of choice, had been accepted by a major online publication. This time, she didn't cry when she got the email. She didn't question whether she was good enough or if they'd sent it by mistake. She just nodded slowly and whispered, "Of course." She was starting to believe it, not because someone told her so, not because someone kissed her forehead and said sweet things that melted in the morning, but because she had built something. A self. From pain, yes, but also from fire, and choice, and bold, unshakable clarity. Kenneth had remained nearby, like the edge of a page. You hadn't finished reading yet. Sometimes they met for lunch and talked about nothing important, just shared thoughts about weird dreams, strange books, and the way some people never knew they were lonely until it was too late. Other times, they sat in silence, comfortable. Soft.it was early August when he finally said something different. They were sitting on a bench near the lake, ice creams in hand, their legs brushing now and then. "Sierra," he said carefully, "if I ever told you I wanted more, would that ruin this?" She didn't answer right away. She watched a dog chase its tail in the grass. She counted 3 dragonflies skimming the water. Then she looked at him. "More scares me." Kenneth nodded slowly. "It should. I don't know if I want it. I don't need you to want it now. I might never want it. I'd still sit on this bench." That made her laugh, just a small, stunned sound. "You're strange." He smiled, eyes still on the lake. "So are you. That's why I like you." And that was it. No confessions, no drama, just a possibility left in the air, like a door slightly open, not pushed. Sierra didn't walk through it, but she didn't close it either. That night, she wrote in her journal something she hadn't done in a while. This time, it wasn't about pain or betrayal or even healing. It was about now. The strange, quiet joy of now. The power in not needing to belong to anyone but herself. "I was made a bride of waiting. I stood still for years, holding a bouquet of silence. I loved a man who measured time by how long I would stand there for him. But now I write my name in my own ink. I pick my flowers. I walk when I'm ready. I don't wait. I choose." She closed the journal, set it beside her bed, and fell asleep with the window open, the breeze lifting her curtains like wings. The next morning, she woke up to a sunrise that painted her room in gold. She made coffee. She played music. She opened her manuscript, and when her phone lit up with a message from Kenneth, just a picture of a sunrise, no words, she smiled, saved it, and went back to writing, because she was still becoming, and she would never be anyone's waiting place again. She was her own story now, and the ending? She'd choose that too. The end.